Hi everyone, this is Nia and today I'm going to show you how to paint this scenery with autumn trees. I tried another loose style painting and this time I tried to only use 3 primary colors that I've chosen plus white. So firstly, let me go over the colors. Here I have Naphtha Red by M. Graham, Hansa Yellow Light by Daniel Smith, and Paints Grey Bluish by Schmincke. And I'm also going to use Bleed Proof White by Dr. Paige Martins. So these are the primary colors that I've chosen, and what I mean by primary colors is not the true primary colors, but the fact that there's one red, yellow, and blue. As long as you have these 3 colors, you can have an array of mixtures, and the tonality will just change the tone of your painting. So as you can see, the red and the yellow, they're fairly normal for a primary color, but the blue that I've chosen is very dark. In fact, it's mostly a gray with a tone of blue. So like any other primary colors, I can make secondary and tertiary colors from these 3. The difference, as I mentioned before, are the tones that I'd be able to create using these specific colors that I've chosen as primaries. Because this is an autumn painting, I wanted bright reds and oranges, so in that case, that's why I've chosen the Naphtha Red, which I feel is a very strong primary red, and Hansa Yellow Light, which I feel like it will bring the brightness of the oranges from the reds. The only weird or non-conventional color here that I've chosen would be the Paints Grey Bluish, and there are a few reasons why I've chosen Paints Grey Bluish as my blue. The main reason is that I wanted the sky to look a bit more muted and subdued instead of a bright blue, and I feel like this muted color would complement the bright oranges very well instead of just having bright colors on top of each other. But on top of this, I also wanted a dark blue that would be close to a black when it's used in a very thick consistency. This way I'd be able to create an array of values from the light Hansa Yellow to the Paints Grey Bluish, especially when it comes to the greens, purples, and browns that I can mix using this color. And this will just bring the painting to life because I feel like strong shadow colors will just help all the other colors pop out a little bit more and complement the bright colors. So from here, you can already start to see that the colors I've mixed closest to the yellows and the reds are much brighter and saturated compared to the colors that I've mixed with more blues into the reds and the yellows. The colors are a bit more muted, and I feel like the muted colors and the bright colors will just complement each other really well. You can see from the purples that I've mixed, it's quite muted and I can bring it to a very dark value, which is ideal to create the dark colors of the painting. And as for the greens, I particularly like this light green color with more Hansa Yellow in the ratio. The yellow brings out such brightness to the color, whilst the Paints Grey Bluish tones down the green to have a more muted and natural tone, which I feel will complement the oranges and reds really well. So you can see the colors closest to the Paints Grey Bluish, in this case I'll just call it blue, are the most muted out of the rest, and you can try to play with the ratio and find all the in-between colors if you need a better visualization of the array of colors you'll need. Now that we've gone over mixing 2 colors, now let's mix all 3 in different ratios. When you mix all 3, you'll get a brown because, as you guys know, mixing 2 complementary colors together will either mute your color, taking off the saturation and create more of a brownish color with hints of either a warm or cool tone depending on the ratio you've used and which hue you have a higher ratio of. So as an example, I made a green mixture and mixed it with a bit of red as the complementary color, which means I have used all 3 primary colors together in order to create a brown. And from here, you can practice playing with the ratio again. So here I'm going to add more yellow and red to the mixture so the brown becomes lighter and warmer. But if I add more blue and red, which is a purple, it'll become more of a muddy purple color with that touch of yellow. So on the left, the brown that I mixed is heavy with orange and reds. The middle is heavy with yellow, which creates a cooler yellow-brown because the tone of yellow is quite cold from the Hansa yellow light. Then on the right-hand side is heavy with blue and blue-red. And as you can see, by mixing a lot of the blue, the brown is also the darkest. Even if I'm only painting in a medium consistency, it's already close to black. Now, depending on the tones of red, yellow, or blue you've chosen, you'll get a slightly different result in terms of the tonality, but that is completely up to you. So if you don't have these exact colors, it's totally fine as long as you have some sort of red color, some sort of yellow, and a blue. So please don't be discouraged whenever you don't have the exact same colors as I do. I get a lot of people asking what to do if they don't have certain colors, and the thing is, you can always adjust using the hues that you have, but it's just going to be slightly different in tone, which is completely fine. And from there, you can also explore more color mixing by yourself by using a limited palette. Now that we've gone over the colors, let's get to the main piece. I started out by masking my paper like usual, and for this painting, I'm going to keep it very loose. So the only thing I'm going to draw out is just a line for the horizon, and that's pretty much it. Firstly, I'm going to mix in a touch of yellow with Payne's Gray Bluish. This is just a touch to make the blue slightly lighter, just like a slightly contaminated blue, but don't go too overboard or else it'll turn green. Then after this, I'm going to take a medium to thick consistency of Payne's Gray Bluish to paint the top of the sky with quite a heavy brush load so I can spread it around the top section. Then I'm going to continue this down with a heavy load of the blue with a touch of yellow downwards until I reach the horizon line. You can see that as I paint downwards, I just keep adding water instead of paint, so the color becomes much lighter at the bottom. To paint the sky, I didn't add water on the paper before painting because I don't want the surface to be overly wet, just evenly damp, which is the state that my paper is in right now. And I'm ready to paint in the trees loosely just to map out the position and colors. So for the trees, I'm just going to use reds, oranges, yellows, and greens. I'm just going to place them randomly, creating abstract clumps of color that I can layer on to create the trees as I continue on to paint. For the yellows, reds, and oranges, I try to only use those colors without adding in the blue so the color stays as vibrant as possible. There is already a little bit of blue from the background, so I don't want to make those colors more muddy than it is. And as for the green, it's up to you whether you want to create a really bright green as I've demonstrated in the color wheel that I've painted earlier, but for me, I like the green to be a little bit more muddy and muted, so for that I added a touch of red because we're still going to build on the colors and we are going to add more muted colors on top of this. So especially for the reds and the yellows, I try to make them as vibrant as possible, and I try to also wash my brush in between whenever I'm switching colors from the reds to the greens. After I finish mapping out the base colors very roughly, now I'm going to add water to the bottom of the trees and continue to add more water downwards in order to create a damp surface so I can use the wet on wet effect again to paint the water reflection. Now that the bottom portion is damp, I'm going to go in with the blue to paint the reflection of the sky roughly to replicate the top half of the painting. Then I'm going to use the same color mixtures to paint the reflection of the trees. And this does not have to be exact because your eyes will just adjust to the position and recognize it as a reflection. So as long as you create a rough idea by using similar colors and in similar mirrored image, it should be convincing enough for your eyes to recognize it as a reflection. Next, I'm going to use this fan brush to fan the colors downwards to create a soft reflection. Then once the paper is mostly dry but still cold to the touch, I'm going to layer on mostly the same colors more vibrantly in a medium to thick consistency to paint on top of the mapped out trees. I'm painting using this weird fan brush to create a bit of a texture. The brush is actually way too big for this amount of space, but this is the only fan brush I've got, so I'm just going to try to work with what I have. This is not even a watercolor brush, but this has rough bristles for oil or acrylic paintings, but I wanted to create the rough texture, so I decided to use this and I felt like it worked out pretty well. But of course, this is a weird brush and not everyone will have the same, so just try to use whatever brush you have, something that's even a bit more frayed or textured, so you can create uneven and textured brush strokes for those trees. When I was painting the trees on top, I was using more of a dry brush load to create more textures, but as I painted more, I decided to try a wetter brush load because this brush is fairly textured and the bristles are quite sparse anyway, and I found that the wetter brush load works really well to paint the water reflection, which I'm treating mostly the same as how I painted the top half. But once I'm done layering on the colors for the water reflection to build the saturation, I'm going to once again fan the colors downwards and also add more blue to the sky reflection. Then I'm going to fan the colors in the opposite direction, which is horizontally, to even out the colors a little bit more. I'm going to go back in and build the colors again, and this time I'm going to also start mixing browns to paint the bottom portion of the trees and suggest some depth and shadows. I'm using my fan brush to cover the larger spaces, but then switch to my liner brush to paint on the browns for smaller areas. To create the browns for the trees, I like the browns to have a higher ratio of the color of the trees most of the time. So for the browns on the yellow or the orange tree, I use mostly either orange or yellow in the brown mixture. And as for the red trees, I tend to add a bit of purple to the brown. And for the green trees, I either add a greenish brown or a reddish tone for the trees with warmer greens. Again, this does not have to be accurate because this is a loose painting, but just take it as a time to experiment with colors and also color combinations. To build the depth further, I'm going to use a thick consistency of brown with a lot of purple in the mixture. I'm going to add more shadows on the bottom of the trees and also use this color to paint on branches using my liner brush. When painting thin branches, it is best to use a very light to dry brush load in order to create really fine lines. So dab the excess water off your brush and make sure you have a medium to thick consistency of paint, so those lines can be quite distinct. I try to paint the branches randomly around the page, some lone branches as well as branches between the trees to make the trees look less bulky. I'm also going to add small branches for the bushes at the front and add tiny leaves using my liner brush around the outer portion of the trees and near some of the branches that I've painted earlier. Now that the colors are mostly dry, I can see that the colors are becoming a bit more dull, so I'm going to layer on more of the same base colors as I used for the trees just to increase the vibrancy. I'm still going to create loose brush strokes by tapping with the tip of my brush in different directions so the trees doesn't look too static, and you'll also probably notice that I switch my palette around. You can either do this or clean your palette because there were too many browns already, and because I want the colors to be just as clean as the base colors, I picked a clean area to mix my paint to avoid muddiness. Going back to the fan brush again, I used a very thin consistency of brown to paint horizontally, just very lightly across the water surface, just to create a little bit of texture. At any point, I would go back to building up the colors on the trees or add branches and shadows to balance out the colors further. And after that, I'm also going to start using my bleed-proof white to add the reflections and also branches to break up some of the darker shapes of the trees. For the water reflection with both the white and the light brown, I like to place the lines closer together near the trees or further away from our view. And as it gets to the bottom of the page or closer to our view, I tend to place the white lines or the brown lines a bit further apart just to give it a little bit of perspective. Okay, at this point, I'm not really done yet, but I always feel the need to take off the masking tape first to see what it looks like with a clean frame. This is quite a bad habit of mine, but I always feel like I have a better visualization after I see it unmasked. But yeah, so if you're at this stage, please go on with the video first to make that decision. I mean, you can technically call this finished, but I felt like I want to add more details, so I'm just going to keep working on it. I decided to add a bit of grass growing out of the water. I'm also going to paint the reflection of the grass using a lighter version of the same color and also paint horizontal lines to break up or separate the grass from the reflection so it doesn't look like just a continuous line. When I'm painting the grass, I make sure to paint from the bottom up so the top or the tip of the grass is much lighter and thinner compared to the bottom. With this said though, I'm going to do the complete opposite for the reflection because the thickest would be on the top and the bottom should be the thinner part of the grass. While working on the bottom half of the painting or the water, I decided to also add specks of orange because I thought it would be nice to have little dots of orange to represent leaves which have fallen on top of the water. So that's what I'm doing here. I also added different colors according to the color of the trees. And from here on, I'm just going to start building on the details and redefining the trees that I've painted earlier. I like to stick to my liner brush to get small uneven textures of the leaves. And I tried to separate the branches using a darker version of the same color of the trees. So if the tree is yellow, I try to add a little bit of natural red to the yellow to create a deeper yellow. And if I were to paint on the red trees, I tend to add a little bit of blue to the red to create a reddish purple and so on. I am being a bit more controlled with the placement because I don't want to cover up what I've painted, but this is just to add additional layers of detail and to separate the trees further. I like to also go back in with my browns to define the position of the trees, which ones are in front and which ones are at the back. So naturally the shadows or the darker values would be placed on the leaves which are further at the back. Here, as you can see, I'm breaking up the shapes of the orange trees. I like to place the shadows mostly at the bottom where the trees look too connected to each other, and I try to also use saturated brown colors, more of a muted red instead of just a brown or a muted orange to separate the trees. If not, you'll just end up taking down the saturation of the painting. This is why I try to just create more of a darker version of the color of the trees themselves. As I build up the color, I try using a thicker consistency to get darker values of the color of the trees. And I also like to add small loose leaves on some of the branches again, so it looks a bit more wispy and it has more movement in that way. And yeah, so that's basically the final step, and I'm just going to keep doing this until I'm happy with the amount of details I have on my painting. You can always go back to the previous steps too if you feel like you need to balance out certain details and things like that. So this is sort of like the final step and also final adjustment stage. So at this point, I'm pretty happy with the amount of details that I've added, and I'm just going to call this one done. That's pretty much it for this loose scenery. Like usual, all the list of tools that I used for this painting, as well as my social media links, will be in the description box. If you're still here, thank you so much for watching till the end, and I'll see you at the next one. Bye!